when change comes, the consequences are either positive or negative, but what matters is how we react to the changes that we witness along the line. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of your discursive program. It is Global Insight on For You Media Africa, and of course today we want to revisit the topic which we have actually analyzed on this platform, de-dollarization, and today we are looking at the stance from the one of the U.S. presidential contenders in the person of former President Donald Trump, promising a 100% tariff or harsh measures towards countries that are vying or working towards ensuring that the dollar is no longer the reserve currency, as global economic landscapes shift and tensions escalate, especially among major powers. The topic of de-dollarization continue to emerge as a focal point of discussion and action in the new world journey. So in a significant departure from long-lasting monetary practices, according to some reports, countries, especially the BRICS blocs and others, are leading the charge in moving away from the US dollar, making or marking a transformative moment in international trade, and of course seeing how the international financial architecture and the currency for reserves can be, of course, given a new phase. Thus, in the run-up to the November 2024 presidential elections, former President Donald Trump, one of the contenders, has vowed to impose severe tariffs on countries that partake in this de-dollarization movement. He underscored the increasing contentious nature of course, this actually underscored the increasing contentious nature of global financial relationship, and of course, we want to analyze what remains at stake as the former president and of course one of the candidates or contenders in the impending presidential elections in the United States of America, has come to vow harsh stance to anybody who is actually advocating for the replacement of the US dollars as a reserve currency in the global world. You are most welcome. And today, with a panel of experts, we are going to explore the complexities of this topic at a time of practical global transformation and of course confrontation at the same time and at every level. This is Global Insight. Welcome once more. If you are just tuning in, this is Global Insight. Today, we want to focus on the viewpoint of former President Donald Trump of the United States of America, vying to impose harsh measures on countries advocating for the replacement of the dollar as the international reserve currency. So with the panel of experts, which I will unveil to us at this particular moment, we want to look at the stakes involved and how, of course, this will alter the global financial architecture. So we take you now to the let's take you to the Russian Federation, acknowledging the presence of YULIA BERG, political scientist, founder GLOBUS Expert Club, who is here to give insight on a topic for this day, highlighting on some of the complexities surrounding this issue of de-dollarization. You're welcome, dear Yulia.
Hello, I'm happy to join the program, and I think today's topic is fundamental, and the issues that are going to be discussed today really are fundamental for the global transformation, as the issues related to economy and financial systems, they do not just define trade, and they do not just imply the key instruments for, let's say, control, but they also imply major battles being fought around those.
Which is very imperative for us to understand, and for major stakeholders to understand the complexities of the issue, as we highlighted already in our preamble, dear Yulia. And of course, we also appreciate the presence of HARLEY SCHLANGER, who is the international spokesperson, Schiller Institute. Welcome, sir, and it's a pleasure having you once more on Global Insight.
Well, thank you for your invitation. I'm very happy to be with you. I'm happy to see Yulia again. I think the importance of this can't be overstated. There's a transformation going on, as you pointed out, in the world, and there are some people who are not happy with that, namely the corporate cartels, the financial institutions of the West, which have had their way for 500 or 600 years in one form or another of colonialism. And we're seeing the Global South break with that through especially the institution of the BRICS and the potential for a new settlement system, new trade system, and more importantly, the opposition to it can be seen through what's going on in Ukraine right now. Because I would argue that the war against Russia is partly designed to stop this shift. So it's very important to discuss it and give people a full picture of what's at stake and what's happening.
Absolutely, which is imperative. I will stay with you, dear HARLEY. You know, the political atmosphere in the United States of America is actually heating up, and we see the contenders, especially Donald Trump, making utterances, and one of such which caught the attention still of, you know, the global world, as the world is actually watching events in the U.S., was the fact that he underlined that should the dollar actually lose its position as you know, the international #1 international currency, it will be some sort of a war, and promising 100% tariff on the countries vying to see that the dollar is replaced. Should they do you know, trade or engage in trade with the United States of America? What is your take on this? Do you see it as just you know, a political rhetoric, so politicians going for elections or campaigning, or do you see Trump, if elected, coming again to impose sanctions, tariffs, which can, you know, impede trade between the U.S. and other countries? I think China is one of those nations that is suffering from an increase in tariff from the Trump administration back then.
Well, when you're talking about Donald Trump, there's an element of bravado, of a mix of threats. You never know exactly what you're going to get. One thing that's predictable is that he's unpredictable. But I would go back a step and raise this point from a different standpoint. The problem with the dollar is not the emergence of the BRICS or the Global South or the idea of de-dollarization. The problem with the dollar is a 50-year arc of move away from physical economic investment and production into financialization. And in the process, the dollar has been used as a weapon to keep the developing sector from developing, to be a source of cheap labor and cheap raw materials. And so the dollar crisis is self-imposed. Now, Trump played a role in that with his liberal use of sanctions, and Biden went even further with sanctions, so that countries can't trust the United States as an honest broker, and therefore, how can you trust the dollar? But I would go one step further. I would say that the biggest threat to the move to a new system doesn't come from Trump. It comes from the group of financial and corporate interests that control both parties in the United States. Biden has done quite a bit to disrupt the potential for the BRICS and the emergence of this new financial and development system. So I think while Donald Trump has a very big mouth and a big voice and can be very provocative, what Biden has done and what Harris says she'll do if she's elected is more of the same. It's an attempt to suppress the development of the formerly less developed countries and to keep them as vassals of the Anglo-American financial system.
Thank you so much for that. And of course, just in line with what Harley had underlined, dear Yulia, we want to look at the complexities which have led to this call for de-dollarization, especially as far as the imposition of sanctions is concerned. Let's take the case of Russia, and of course why it is imperative to ensure that even with this global transformation happening, there is also a need to relook strategies on how we can promote more local currencies and even an alternative financial systems where countries can boast of financial sovereignty that will, prevent them from unnecessary sanctions, which are sometimes geopolitically inclined.
The sanctions have taught us once again that business and trade is pretty much like water, so it would always find its way to flow. And if you want some stats on this, if I'm not mistaken, last year in 2023, since there were several countries and several big economic players, including Russia, using alternative methods, the amount of money that flew or was transferred via USDT was equal to the amount that was transferred using the Visa system. So Visa is under, or Visa sanctioned Russia. Iran is sanctioned as well, and we have Venezuela, also a big player, and a big player in the global trade, including oil and gas. So those three countries being one of the biggest ones in terms of the sanctioned countries. And of course, all of their partners that had to use USDT, they increased the amount of transactions so that it managed to beat Visa. That's fact number one. Fact number two is that Tether, one of the biggest cryptocurrencies, it made 700 million more profit than the BlackRock investment company. So this is how you can see that those alternatives, they actually do pose threats to the existing system. And that's why I assume so much attention is being paid to alternative systems. And what is happening now is that when the threats and the risks are very much clear, as well as it's clear that those systems are capable of making such transactions, they would be attempted to be chopped down at the root.
And of course, posing a major problem to international trade and cooperation. Let me stay with you, Yulia. When we listen to Trump talking of a 100% tariff on countries doing business with the United States of America, who are actually advocating for this de-dollarization, we want to ask the impact of this on international trade and how it will affect trade balances, not just between U.S. and partners engaging in bilateral trades, but how it will affect holistically multilateral trade institutions.
Well, when you talk about real economy, the key player is definitely China, because now they control 2/3 of the dollar mass and they control most of the production. China is #1 trade partner for most of the countries in the world. So a lot of what depend on how China would act, and a lot would depend on the position that China would take, because they have pretty much everything except for, let's say, the political will in their hands in order to ensure changes at in the global economic system. But it also makes them dependent, number one, of that system, as they're the ones that at the moment control, as I said, 2/3 of it and benefit most of it. But if you look at China's policies in terms of how they use the profits that they get from trade, you will see that they try to reinvest most of the money, and if I'm not mistaken, in terms of numbers, they make the trade balances that they make $400 billion more than they spend. So they try to use that profit to invest into real projects, to invest into infrastructure projects all across Africa, for example, in Latin America and in many other countries, mostly using the One Belt, One Road initiative that opens up a path to build infrastructure globally. So we try to real project, physical, let's say, projects, and this policy ensured their capacity in terms of trade, in terms of market capacities, and many other things. So I think one of the key questions to ask in terms of this is what China is thinking, planning, and what China's position will be in this global transformation, because obviously, the current U.S. policies and the ones that are being proclaimed at the moment are all based on the fact that the U.S. is trying to save its position that it's losing at the moment in terms of being the hegemon in economy, which is guaranteed by the military might to a great extent. But we also see by the happenings in Ukraine, we also see that the military might, based on, let's say, the equipment, the sophisticated equipment being produced at a high cost, does not mean that this military might can ensure a victory on the battleground. Because here as well, there are many cases when a $300 drone destroys equipment that costs millions of dollars. So here we come to another trap that this economic system that was based on a certain set of bubbles has created for itself.
Sure. Indeed, it shows, like you underlined, Yulia, we are in a world of global transformation. And of course, we also see that as the world is evolving, that's how we are seeing confrontation spiraling, especially along, economic lines. And even yesterday we were talking about information war, and today we're looking at the financial war, which some renowned politicians like, Donald Trump coming out outrightly declaring that any country that is against the dollar maintaining its position, it will actually be some sort of a declaration of war. We are looking at the consequences. I will come back to you subsequently, Yulia. Let me take Harley with this. While we are looking at these utterances from the U.S. and the changes happening with the call for reforms at every level, we want to look at how we may be, especially major stakeholders can mitigate some of these consequences which can come as a result of increase in tariffs, especially on goods in countries doing trade with the United States of America. You mentioned the BRICS bloc in your preliminary statement, sir. So let's look at what ways can the bloc, the BRICS bloc, and other alliances can, what strategies can they bring forth to mitigate some of these negative maybe influences or effects of the potential financial policies or trade policies that may come from the USA, and which you think that can actually affect the general process of international trade?
Well, to answer that, let me go back to a moment to a couple points that Yulia made, which were very important. The United States can no longer dictate economic terms to the world.
Sure.
The global South is emerging as an economic power, but an economic power in the sense that it's a productive power. What we're seeing now in the potential in Africa, for example, in some African countries, the using of the raw materials of those countries and the labor force of those countries for their own national sovereign development. That's a change. But then you add the big picture with China. The United States could run economic warfare against China. The loser would be the United States, because as much as China has been dependent on the United States and the World Trade Organization and so on to build up its industrial economy, so has the United States, as we saw with the collapse of the supply chains during the COVID crisis. The United States is dependent on China. The United States is dependent on strategic metals from Afghanistan, from Russia, and elsewhere. So the idea that somehow you could slap a tariff on these countries and weaken them and force them to stay in line under the control of the unipolar order, that, as we say in Texas, that horse has already left the barn. That's not going to work. And the dollar holdings of China make it a potential threat to the United States if the United States were to do that. The more important question then is wealth production. But before I get to that, let me mention one other thing. Here in Germany, we're seeing an economic collapse which was brought on by NATO policy and Anglo-American financial policy. The sanctions against Russia, the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines, the loss of cheap Russian oil and gas has had a profound effect. And now we're seeing one of the powers of the German economy, the auto sector, crashing. Volkswagen is shutting plants. The bet that they could compete with China in electric vehicles has failed. So the West is sinking under the weight of its own bad decisions, which include environmental decisions, sanctions, and also the idea that somehow you can keep refinancing debt by getting cheap goods from the global South. So there's an interdependency which Americans don't recognize. They see us as we're the great power. We can do whatever we want. But that's not true anymore. Now, the real issue then is, will the West recognize the error of its ways? That instead of picking wars and sanctions and trying to dictate policies, maybe the West should start changing its policies. And one of the key things with the BRICS is the development of the new development bank, the idea that there will be credit for industrial production, for infrastructure. You know, we're in a situation now, I can just tell you, the German train sector is collapsing. This used to be one of the great transportation sectors in the world. And now the on-time level is below that of countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on. So the West is on a suicidal course. And were Trump to say, we're going to go ahead and we're going to sanction anybody who doesn't dance to our tune, Biden's already doing that. The West is trying to force the rest of the world to support the war against Russia and Ukraine. And outside of Europe, there are very few countries that are doing that. So this is the global transformation. It's a new era. And it's a very hopeful period as long as the United States and NATO don't blow up the world in the process.
I will stay with you, Harley, talking about sanctions, which you mentioned. And when we look at, the dynamics at play, we also see that these countries that impose, especially economic sanctions on others, have what to benefit. Now, do you think, you quite mentioned that with all the changes happening and the fact that we are already in the world of, total transformation, where we have shifting alliances and other things are coming into play. How do you think? With the fact that the U.S. has always had this, this philosophy of U.S. first, I beg your pardon, they are not trying to, use this sanctions, economic sanctions, in order to create a barricade, because de-dollarization will obviously, alter the efficacy of some of these sanctions that they impose on nations, which to a larger extent work on the benefits of the U.S. economy.
Well, the sanctions work to the extent that poorer countries have nowhere else to go for credit. This is the whole secret of how the International Monetary Fund and the global central banks have controlled the neo-colonial system. That if your only hope is to get a loan from the IMF or a loan from the United States, then you're somewhat forced, blackmailed almost, to go along with the idea of the Western establishment. Now, what happens if there's a new credit agency? And this is what is being developed with the BRICS, through the new development bank. And it's based on the idea of using digital currencies for settlements, not for day-to-day shopping and business and everything else, but for the bigger picture. How do you get to the point where you can have an alternative system that can function and is sanction-proof? And the Russian economist Sergei Glaziev has been saying that the BRICS are preparing a sanction-proof currency. So this is where you see the panic now that's reflected in the West's attempt to try and turn the war in Ukraine around, to win the war, the Kursk incursion and so on. Yeah. This is desperation. And I'll just give you another example, the sanctioning against Russian, or RT, and Russian media. The idea that somehow you can blot out the truth by putting fines and penalties and shutting down media. The United States asked India to join this and to sanction RT and silence it. And the Indians said, it's not in our interest to do that. And so this is a new era. I think what President Putin said not so long ago at the Valdai Club meeting, there are tectonic shifts underway. Sure. And nations are going to have to adapt to these shifts or be left behind. Mm-hmm. And what I see as an American historian and an economist is that the U.S. is somewhat brain dead right now. It's assuming that the world will continue to dance to the tune from the United States. Seeing that's changed.
Indeed, and it becomes problematic that even the stakeholders in the U.S. are aware of these major shifts or changes, yet there is no change in policy, especially policy that policies which promote direct confrontations or even major sanctions due to the U.S.'s veto power and other knowing that the country is always been viewed as a superpower, and narratives are changing. Now we need a new platform to be able to bring forth measures that could circumvent these sanctions, which the U.S. is actually using or basing on to stifle the economies of other countries. But now, with the emergence of nations in the global south, we want to look at their place. Yulia, bringing to you this question, which Harley actually interrogated in his analysis, how do other alliances or blocs bring strategies, or what strategies can they bring to be able to circumvent these sanctions through the use of an alternative currency that will, lead somehow to having a more balanced international trade that will favor even emerging countries?
Well, at the moment, an alternative payment system is not a technical issue. There are already quite a lot of technical solutions that do exist, that have been tested, and that could be used as an alternative. But it's an issue of political will and political decisions. And here, I would like to add another point, that political will does not only depend on, let's say, the strength of character.
I think we'll come to you subsequently to the question, and we continue to invite you, ladies and gentlemen, that we are live on YouTube for You Media Africa English, so you can actually leave your comments on this program of what you think about the stance by Trump, who is largely known for some of his very stern utterances and decisions which actually have attracted widespread condemnation. And that is what we're talking about, him coming out, commenting on de-dollarization move, promising harsh measures. Let me come back to you. Harley, let's look at the role of the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and even the World Bank. And of course, what is their place in trying to bring the United States into the understanding or the realization of the total transformation that we're no longer in a unipolar world, but now we're in a multipolar world with diverse opinions and new changes coming into play, that we need to collaborate more and compromise some of policies that will promote a fertile ground for international trade and even cooperation.
Well, I'm afraid that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have been instruments of Western
Hello, Harley,
imperialism.
you're muted. I can't hear you, please.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Unfortunately, we can't hear you well, Harley. Hoping to fix the technical hurdles. While waiting for that to be fixed, I want to actually remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a discursive program, Global Insight on For You Media Africa, and today we are looking at the role of a more balanced international trade that will inculcate new policies and the new developments happening along economic lines in the global world. We come back to you, Harley. If you can hear me now, we're looking at the role of the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, and even the World Bank in trying to soften some of these stances from the stance, I beg your pardon, from the United States pertaining its role in the financial architecture, global financial architecture.
I hear you fine. Can you hear me now? Do you hear me okay? Are you hearing me? No?
Unfortunately, it was difficult comprehending you, Harley. Just to remind our viewers that countries have been at the fore to ensure that this de-dollarization is actually practical, and we're here looking particularly at Russia, China, and even India and other countries in the BRICS bloc, even across the African continent. We are taking us to Zimbabwe, where the government has actually replaced the US dollar to adopting its own dollar, and we're also looking at in the Congo, other measures, financial measures are being taken to be able to attain that level that the currencies or local currencies of nations won't be tagged, or the value won't be tagged to the dollar. But of course, this is a transformation, or these are some reforms which are bringing about more confrontations from the United States of America, as we see leaders making utterances which actually see that they are not yet accommodating the changes which are occurring along the international scope of trade and cooperation. So what are those parameters that can be put in place to curtail the consequences of such sanctions? And of course, what are alternative for financial systems or models which can fast-track this dream of de-dollarization, or for the benefit of the global world in terms of doing business and other international transactions? I'll come back to you to check if everything is okay, if we can already hear you. Harley, let's continue with the question still on the role of multilateral financial institutions in this journey of de-dollarization, and even on the position of the United States of America.
All right, I reconnected. Can you hear me now? Do you hear me? Hello?
Hello, dear Harley.
It's still not connecting?
I can actually hear you. I think the technical issue is on the other side.
Ah.
Unfortunately, I cannot hear you. Just to mention also that the BRICS foreign ministers met some months ago, and one of the recommendations arrived at where the adoption of
Hello, do you hear?
Okay, everything okay now, dear Harley, and of course we want to apologize for the interruption, and of course you have the floor to continue to analyze the place of multilateral financial institutions.
Well, what I was saying before is that the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization were instruments that were set up as part of the unipolar order. And they go back to the end of World War II with the IMF and the role of the City of London, controlling flows of currency, trade. It became quite extreme, for example, in the 1970s when Kissinger worked out the petrodollar agreement with the Saudis so that all oil sales were denominated in dollars. So it was an imperial system. Now the IMF has some very competent accountants and economists who have been warning that the biggest problem right now is the debt in the major so-called developed countries, that the United States with a $35 trillion debt is potentially headed toward a default. So when you then look at the question of what about the developing sector, or look at China, what China has done is show that you can extend credit without creating inflation or uncontrollable debt. And the way you do that is what the United States used to do. You extend credit into producing items that add to your physical wealth and productivity. And by physical, I mean non-financialization. The billionaires in the United States make their money now through speculation. And the Western system is a speculative system, as opposed to the idea of value added to the real economy, which includes productivity of your workforce and improved standard of living, better education, better health care, and so on. The West is going backwards on this. But what we're seeing in the case of China, for example, in a number of other BRICS countries is improvements because the investment is being channeled into physical economic production. And so what the IMF has done in the past is monetary manipulations where they'll extend credit in return for getting agreement to cut spending. And that's been a disaster. What's necessary is new credit, but credit backed by something real, future production. And this is where we see a potential for Africa, because the present conditions for most African countries has been indebtedness because of the International Monetary Fund system. Why stick with that system? If the BRICS New Development Bank can generate through bonds and trade, or trade in national currencies, as we're seeing between the Saudis and China or India and Russia, you have a capability to extend credit for real physical economic wealth development. That's the way of the future. And the idea that somehow you're going to protect the bloated indebtedness of the United States or the United Kingdom by continued looting, that's not going to work anymore. And so either the West is going to have to drop its insistence on being the determining factor in international trade and everything else, and recognize that cooperation for mutual benefit is the way of the future. And that's what we're seeing coming out of the BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the African Development Bank, and so on.
Thank you, Harley. Thank you. Coming back to you now, Yulia. We still want to look at how the BRICS and other nations can circumvent so the sanctions or economic sanctions coming from the United States as a result of this de-dollarization move by countries, particularly in this multipolar world.
I have already started saying that in terms of technical solutions that the BRICS could provide, there is no problem in terms of providing a technical solution, and those have already been elaborated years ago and tested and so on, so they're ready. The problem at the moment is not even the political will, and it's not, strength or weakness of the characters of the political leaders. The problem is different. What the U.S. military doctrine says is that economic threats are quite enough to use all kinds of weapons, possibly including the nuclear ones. So if that translates as the fact that nuclear weapons could be used if the dollar is threatened, then this is the key obstacle that stops and prevents the BRICS from implementing their alternative system.
Talking about political will, let's look at some of the geopolitical alliances now, Yulia. In what ways do you think, or maybe could the increasing use of local currencies or even an alternative currency to the dollar in trade among countries, particularly Russia, China, and even India, reshape some geopolitical alliances and power dynamics along trade lines?
Well, at the moment, the use of local currencies is not exactly what we think it is, because in order to define exchange rates, you still need to convert through the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar still remains the key, let's say, payment reference point, and even if local currencies are used, they're not used directly. So the exchange rate that you could possibly be talking about when you talk about operations or transactions between Russia and China, Russia and India and other countries, they're still not free. They're still a part of the existing system. So it's definitely a step forward. Yet it doesn't mean that that the exchange rates are not defined by the exchange rates to US dollar, because that is at the core. And once again, once there is a threat to that very economic system, we do not really know what's going to happen and to which extent the military protection of the economic system could possibly go. So that I believe is still one of the key issues that basically pulls back all of those efforts that were being made, especially in the recent couple of years.
Thank you so much. I would direct the same question to you, dearly, because it is a very imperative today. If we're looking at the number of confrontations which have increased across the global world, we will see that these confrontations are mostly along geopolitical lines, and of course, because of the new wind of change which is blowing. So now, with what Yulia just said, pertaining the fact that even if we promote at this particular moment the use of local currency, it is still very difficult because the exchange rate, we have to bring in the dollar. That now brings us to the question of the feasibility of de-dollarization. Do you think it's actually feasible, and how do you think, or maybe how much time can we take to arrive at that point where we will not need to check the dollar rates to be able to engage, with other currencies?
The Russian economist I mentioned earlier, Sergei Glaziev, who has been very close to the ideas of the Schiller Institute and the LaRouche movement when it comes to physical economy. And what he said is what Yulia just reported, that it's premature to think that you could dump the dollar and have a functioning world economy. That too much of transactions and trade and the ability to purchase anything still goes through the dollar system. But that's the problem. How do you replace that? Now, this is where you see the emergence of this idea of using blockchain. Excuse me a second. The emergence of blockchain and digital currencies, that, as Glaziev said, can become sanctions-proof because they're not controlled centrally. That it's a form of decentralization where governments directly create currency, but they do it through bonds that are backed by, for example, the BRICS countries. But we're not at that stage yet. The question is, will the United States, the United Kingdom, and NATO allow that to occur? And it appears as though they don't really want to let it occur because it means the end of their imperial order. But that's where I really think you have to look at the fact that Europe is suffering. The European countries, even though they're clinging to the idea that the U.S., you have to do what the U.S. says, their economies are suffering. And I think we're going to see a change in Germany very quickly.
Sure.
Because the current coalition government is collapsing in state elections. So one of the hopes of the future is that if you could bring European production and European economies into a relationship with the BRICS. And the German businessmen want to do that. They're going to China. They're trying to work out relationships. But the European Union and NATO are saying no. So this is the confrontation we have. As Yulia said, there are various kinds of technical capabilities that have been proven to work.
Sure.
But it's a question now of making a decision to go in that direction. And I think what Glaziev said and what Putin has said is, be patient, we're moving in that direction.
Indeed, it takes or it will take patience and strategies to attain that level, which brings us to this point of currency competitiveness. We want to look at how this even de-dollarization plan will not bring about more complexities or confrontations even within countries that are advocating for this. And the question is being directed to you, dear Yulia, with this, the potential decline of the dollar's dominance as the international reserve currency, and of course in terms of international trade, which currencies are most likely to emerge as viable alternatives, and what factors can we use to determine their success, which will not bring us to the realities of what we're facing with the dollar being the prime currency at the international level in terms of trade and other aspects?
Well, I think it's not even about which currency is gonna substitute dollar somehow, or which ones would be playing that role in the future. But it's about reshaping the entire economic system, because if we're talking about an economic system that is to be based on real value, as Harvey just mentioned, it's not about selecting the strongest one available at the global market at the moment, but it's about redefining the very principles of the global economic system. So we could be talking about strong currencies of the moment that could play the role of some kind of a transit currency. Yet at the same time, the new system is to be reshaped in a way in which, let's say, the real or the actual potential, the actual economic potential of the countries could be the basis of the new economic system. So if we're talking about African countries, for example, look at the GDP and look at the currency map available in, for example, Mali. So it's just 40% of the financial mass. The financial mass is 40% of the GDP, which means that the economy is very much underestimated. But if we take the very same country of Mali, let's say, and if we re-evaluate its economy based on the potential of its resources, we will see a completely different picture. And of course, when we talk about those dysfunctional principles that at the moment are at the basis of many economies of the region that still use the CFA, the ex-colonial, the ex-colonial franc, and the current neo-colonial currency, right? So even though the name of the currency itself changed, the key principle has not changed. Actually, does not reflect the interests of the countries that using that currency. So I think as for the transit ones, well, probably China and yuan will be playing one of the key roles, just simply because they do control 2/3 even of the dollar, let's say, mass. Yet at the same time, when we talk about the stable and resilient global economic system, it just has to imply a re-evaluation of the core principles. Otherwise, we will be stuck in something that would be no more than a substitute. And I think the example of the CFA franc and all of those discussions that have been going around the possibilities of introduction of echo as a substitute, it's pretty much the same. So the principles do not change. We can change the brands, the names, and the labels, but it's not gonna lead to sustainable changes.
Indeed, it's actually going to be a subtle journey towards the realizing the objective of de-dollarization. Now, let's try to look at something which is occurring along the every sphere in the world. Harley, with you today, we're talking about geopolitical confrontations in terms of war, and also we're looking at information war in terms of news giving. Was maybe last week that we saw the BRICS Media Summit holding in Russia, Moscow, and of course one of the key recommendations was to see that media organs try to promote a more balanced information to mitigate the consequences on what is happening across the line, especially in terms of misinformation, disinformation, and other negative consequences of information that is ensuring the spiraling information war. Now, with this de-dollarization plan, what other parameters can we use to mitigate? Here we're actually looking at how we can bring measures to reduce the consequences which are coming from the resistance, the resistance from the United States of America, that will not have live from a more physical confrontation of war. We are looking at the crisis in the Middle East and even in eastern Ukraine, to a more financial war, because it will become disastrous if the world is actually engaged in a financial war that will alter, the financial systems, and we know the effect of such on the global economy.
Well, let me say that I think the point that Yulia just made about the change in thinking is the crucial one. The change in thinking about what is wealth. Is wealth the kind of financialization where you can have a stock market go through the roof with values that are completely out of line, where companies don't make enough money to pay their debt, and yet their stock value is soaring? Now, that's the kind of thinking that dominates the West, and the West can't pay for it. That's why they're continuing a neo-colonial looting policy. So the change in thinking is a move away from monetarism, that is monetary values and based on speculative finance, to what it actually takes to build an economy where you have young people who have a future, who have an education, and who can go to work so they can build their country. And this is the fight that's underway. Now, the problem in the West is the control of the media. The media is another corporate cartel. And you have psychological warfare constantly, which is taking people away from reality. For example, you mentioned the war in Ukraine. In the United States, the line still is that Ukraine can still win the war. We just have to give them more weapons. We have to give them weapons that they can use to strike inside Russia. And you ask the question then of someone, well, if we start bombing Russia, what is Russia going to do? Oh, Putin's bluffing. He's not going to do anything. That's the kind of danger you have with the media control and the censorship. The shutting down of Telegram, for the move against Telegram is an example, and so on. I could give you dozens of examples of censorship, but it doesn't change reality. You can say all you want, Ukraine is going to win and Zelensky is a great hero, but Ukraine is losing the youth of that country and is being ground up for the purposes of NATO's attempt to weaken Russia. So at a certain point, the censorship meets reality. The question is, do people have the courage to act to change it? And that's the same point Yulia is making in terms of finance. As long as people can become billionaires by bidding for stocks and leverage buyouts and initial public offerings, which are way out of whack with the real physical potential of the company, as long as that goes on, you'll have a bubble. Eventually, all bubbles pop. And the Western economy has seen that over and over and over. If the emergence of the new system around the BRICS and physical economy can be consolidated around a new settlement system, around eventually a new currency, it's not a question of fighting against the American people. It's fighting against the financial cartels like BlackRock that control the system. And I would say, while much of the rest of the world is realizing that, the weakness is the American people haven't realized it yet. And the people in Europe haven't realized yet that we're living off the fruits of the exploitation of other countries. And hopefully that will change.
Hopefully that will change, dear HARLEY. And now we want to look at, it's true that the United Nations is not directly involved in, taking some sort of global financial decisions, but I think it is imperative, Yulia, that we still look at the place of the United Nations in this de-dollarization process, because we are quite aware that de-dollarization will bring about a shift in the global dynamics and even in the balance of power. So now, in your own perspective, do you think that the UN has something to offer as far as engaging or making a discourse or comment on this the way the financial the international world is structured financially, and if this can actually have an impact on the bodies in charge of regulating trade balances among countries?
Well, the UN could have played a role if at least the decisions of the UN Security Council were key at the global arena, which unfortunately is not the case at the moment. So we have seen countries being bombed without UN Security Council approval. We have seen sanctions being introduced without the UN approval, and that was fine. And we also all know about the pressure that is being put on the countries in order to vote in a certain way, and the dynamics of the voting on the Ukrainian issues could also prove that. So even the recent claims that African countries could enter the UN Security Council are a bit even those claims are a bit different from the reality, because what the African countries are not getting in this deal when they're entering is the veto right, and that's key in order to be an actor at the UN Security Council. If you're just sitting there listening, even voicing your opinion, but you don't have the veto right, it means that you're an observer, having an observer status rather than an actual participant of the decision-making process. So, well, the UN might be needing some reforms, yet at the same time, if it just went back to its statute, it would have been enough.
Do you have anything to add to that question, dear HARLEY, on the role of the United Nations Security Council in the financial architecture of the world, and how, de-dollarization somehow it's a necessary step to take?
Well, the General Assembly in the past has been an opportunity for discussion. Famously, in 1976, the foreign minister of Guyana, Fred Wills, who was working closely with Indira Gandhi and the non-aligned movement, made a statement. He said, "The time for debt moratoria is now." And this shocked everyone. But the UN doesn't have the authority to intervene in financial markets. The UN is, I think, an essential place for discussion. And it has to be reformed to reflect the shifts in demographics and wealth production in the world. But this is going to have to be fought out country by country, region by region. And what I think is important is the emergence of institutions such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS. You know, one of the things we haven't even mentioned, President Putin addressed the BRICS Financial or the Security Summit, I think, in the last couple of days, and he pointed out that there are 34 nations that are now applying for membership in the BRICS. And they have to be very careful about how they vet them and bring them in. But we're now talking about the BRICS becoming the dominant world economic power because of purchasing power, because of population demographics. And so this is part of the shift, which is not, unfortunately, allowed to manifest itself at the United Nations. But I think with the moves toward cooperation, economic development on bilateral and multilateral basis, this will eventually be reflected. Sure. The veto power of the United States at the UN Security Council has been used terribly to stop injustices from being confronted. The U.S. has been defending the worst elements of the world system. And again, that's a question that we Americans have to address. Do we wish to be seen by the world as an irresponsible, immoral nation that's out for its own sake only? Because that's not the America that I grew up wanting to be a part of.
Sure. And those are some of the questions that we answer as we continue to engage and watch the changes happening along the economic lines in the global world. Coming to you, Yulia, let's look at some of these political ramifications on this aspect. Now we know that most of the countries that are involved in the de-dollarization process are maybe BRICS nations. So how might domestic policies within major economies, let's take the example of Russia, the USA even, and China, influence their respective nations' approaches to some of the major changes that we want to see in the financial architecture or the financial systems, especially this process of de-dollarization?
Sanctions that were first introduced back in 2014 have played a great role in terms of strengthening Russia from the inside, because those sanctions made many people, including the decision makers, lose any illusions regarding the actual future being designed for Russia by the Western countries that introduced the sanctions. So that was when, starting from local agricultural production, going all the way to payment systems and working on all of those alternatives, all of those technologies were being introduced, and starting from 2014 up until 2022, Russia had enough time to already lay some, let's say, foundations for the upcoming global confrontation. So if you're talking about, or if you're asking about domestic policies that that could assist in this complicated global process, definitely pressure was something that has helped to consolidate various kinds of forces within the country, and the pressure and the confrontation, external threats, were the ones that actually played a very constructive role, starting from value systems, because many people have been still under the influence of the what we call the wild 90s, and I think that 2014 was very eye-opening for many, when civilians were being killed in Donetsk and all around Donbass, when people were burnt alive in Odessa. So people started thinking more, questioning more, and the businesses started reacting to the sanctions. It was also very it was becoming very clear in terms of the relations at the international arena. You could already tell, where the relations were to be improved, and where the, let's say, the value foundations were similar enough in order to build economic relations on those.
Sure. And the goal is to ensure even economic stability as we engage in this de-dollarization plan. And it is also a call to all political actors engage in decision making or in the enactment of policies to be more, conscious about the changing dynamics to mitigate the level of instability, economic instability that can emerge as a result of some of these decisions which we take in order to, to resist the change that is coming at this particular moment. Now, HARLEY, could a rapid transition to a multi-currency system, let's put it this way, create instability in the global market? Can we already say that the statement by Donald Trump has already created this instability in the minds of nations? And what measures do you think can be taken to reduce the risks of such?
Let me go back to a point which I think is important in terms of the way disruptions are approached. We had the 2008 financial crisis in the United States, and the decision was made to bail out the banks and the speculators that caused the crisis and let the people who suffered lose their homes. China had a real estate crisis, and what they did is they shut down the corrupt practices of the banks. Bankers went to prison. They protected the people. So the question really is, what does a government intend to do? Is it there for the private special interests of the billionaires and the corporate cartels, or is a government there for the interests of the people? Now, in that sense, what we've seen with Russia handling the sanctions, what Yulia just reported, is very important, because what Putin and his team did was make sure that the physical economy was protected from the speculators and the looters. Now, contrast that to what Zelensky's doing in Ukraine, pledging the future of raw materials and fertile land in Ukraine to the speculators in return for money today. Those are the two distinct differences between a speculative system, which we've been living under, a financial bubble system, and a move to a real physical economy. Sure. Ultimately, it depends on whether a government is committed to protect the interests of its population as a sovereign nation, in which case it needs to work with other nations, and that's the basis for multipolarity. The idea that helping the neighbor is important. The idea that I want to take care of the other countries. We have no fundamental disagreements that can't be resolved through economic cooperation, as opposed to the zero-sum game of we're going to take from you because we need it more than you do.
Sure.
So I think that's the change that has to occur.
Indeed, and talking about the more rationale, and of course, if the politicians or even those at the decision-making tables usually consider the interests of the population, I want us to interrogate this question to Yulia. Now, let's look at how we can ensure a more resilient or a nation or economy in this process of de-dollarization. When we talk about the confrontations occurring at every level, we're looking at how nations are carving their different niches, defining of their national interests and engaging strategically in decisions that will either protect the sovereignty, political, economic, and even social sovereignty of their respective nations. So is this the rationale of these countries behind de-dollarization, to see that especially developing nations, that they have this, financial autonomy that will, along the line, make a clear trajectory for their respective nations, so as not to see us tomorrow being, confronted still by another currency, which is no longer the dollar, but another currency which happens to be hijacking the economies of other nations.
We have come to a point of development, let's say, of the humankind, when we have the technology that ensures a very quick or even prompt information flow, that ensures much more opportunities than we used to have. And so in this kind of an environment, we cannot be using all those methods anymore that allowed for various kinds of exploitation schemes to be present, like the colonial mechanisms, or like crazy examples of influencing people's minds, because information and the truth comes out. So what is essential to understand at this point in time is that we need to restructure the entire complex of international relations in order to make sure that that we understand that our own well-being to a great extent depends on the well-being of others. And if before we were talking about just the closest neighbors, now we're talking about the global community. So that is one of the key things to understand, I believe, because we cannot be trying to build our own prosperity based on somebody else's let's say, grief and sorrow. So that's one of the key things to understand when the new global economic system is being built. So cooperation, joint ventures, added value products, economy based on actual resources and goods, on the actual cost of technology, but not the brands, and all of those things have to be at the very core of the new system.
Okay. Indeed, being at the very core of the new system, that in any decision taken, we should consider sovereignty and how it impacts the parties involved in the cooperation. We have about 8 more minutes to be together, so we want to look at recommendations at this particular moment. I think critics are those who speak to politicians to reduce, some sort of political rhetorics which go a long way to create these confrontations that we are facing in the world at this particular moment. And now, coming to you, Harley, maybe culminating phase of the program, a message to Donald Trump, because when we look at some of the utterances made on issues like, for example, after the first public presidential debate between Trump and Kamala Harris, we saw some sort of reactions, particularly on the issue of animals, and then we want to come back to the Middle East, seeing how children are being slaughtered or killed, I beg your pardon, in the Gaza Strip. And we look at how we make stand decisions on issues which things that we're supposed to, just ignore. But when it comes to humanity, we are so stern and firm on policies that can kill a whole generation. Because, if maybe economics can have it right, stiff economic sanctions can lead to conditions that can even lead to starvation and whatsoever. So what's that strong message that we are sending to Trump and other political actors in the world that are engaged in making decisions that affects globalization, international relations, and international trade?
statement a couple days ago about how he thinks Xi Jinping is one of the smartest leaders in the world. He trusts him, he respects him. He should listen to him. What Xi is talking about is the idea that we have one human race, one common humanity, and that the Chinese undertook a reorganization 30 years ago to lift the entire population of China out of poverty, and they've almost accomplished that. And now they're using the Belt and Road Initiative to do that with other countries. Unfortunately, in the West, and by the way, also, I think President Putin, we should be listening to what he has to say. We should be listening to a lot of the leaders of the Global South who are speaking as representatives of sovereign people, fighting for development of their nation, but not against other nations, but in cooperation. I think the West is in terrible shape, the global North, with this idea that we're indispensable, we're number one, we're the great power, and everyone has to dance to our tune. That's got to change. And hopefully it will change without war. Or it may change when the whole financial system collapses. But I think what we're seeing is the Global South and the BRICS countries are moving to a sustainable development model that we no longer have in the West. And either we change or we're going to be on the outside looking in, assuming we don't launch wars to destroy the rest of the world. So I think the thing that has to be said to President Trump, and I communicated this to him in his first term, that he needs to work with China. Instead of seeing China as an enemy or a threat, the Chinese have demonstrated something profound, that you can develop your nation without harming others.
Sure.
And that's the key to this idea of one humanity.
Thank you so much, dear Harley. Let's round off with you, dear Yulia. Recommendations, the way forward, and the practicalities that we can, some of these policies that we can inculcate in this world and of the new happenings, and reduce the confrontations, especially along the political and economic lines.
Well, I think I've shared my understanding of the key principles in the previous part. So now I would just add that what is essential at the moment is to understand that the change is inevitable, and to be able to go through the transition in a smooth way, because otherwise we will have to deal with the collapse and consequences of mass destruction. But there is a better way, let's say, that implies less of destruction and implies less of shock therapy, as it was called, right?
Sure.
So realizing that the change is inevitable and trying to take it or to ensure it in a smoother way is key right now, because, well, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I suppose around 1 million of lives was already lost, and many millions of lives were seriously damaged. I mean, all of the family members, all of the friends, and all of the, all of those people around, the ones that are gone forever. So not to mention psychological trauma, not to mention many other negative consequences that generations ahead will be dealing with.
Which is quite pathetic, and of course we continue to watch evolving trends along the global world, ensuring that we attend, of course, like you quite mentioned, Yulia, to ensure that the change comes in a smooth way, where we, of course, will see that there won't be some sort of, dominance from the US dollar. And of course we also leave this program and keeping into mind some of the questions which we can ask about the future of global finance and economic interdependence with this de-dollarization plan. And of course the challenge falls back on new alliances like the BRICS and other bodies involved in decision making to be able to rewrite the trajectory of the financial system, to inculcate developing nations and see them also benefits from the advantages of international cooperation and globalization. And it is on this note that I will say immense thank you to you, Yulia, political scientist and also founder GLOBUS Expert Club, for the expert analysis on this topic, which is very paramount at this particular moment of heightened confrontations and transformation. Thank you for your time. And to you, dear HARLEY SCHLANGER, who is the international spokesperson for the SCHILLER Institute. Thank you for the, the insight and, of course, the analysis of that torch into key areas that will pertain to the changes that we need in today's world. You know, when change comes, it's very difficult to align, especially when you have to lose some of the privileges you have as a superpower. But then we are in the world of multipolarity. We are in a world of new dimension of sovereignty and international cooperation that we need to consider humanity. I want to thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for trusting the Pan-African television. Just to say that it is another view of the world, and we will keep bringing to you constructive information as we partake in this world of global transmission.